Hi guys, I'm Kasha. Welcome to our coffee times to talk about horror. And because it is February and Valentine's Day is approaching, I thought why not talk about some books and some horror movies that have that combination between romance and horror. Maybe romance on the forefront, or maybe it's a little subplot here and there, but I wanted to give you some options in case that you want to read some horror in February, but also read a little bit of romance.
It's coffee time!
Horror and romance actually go together more than we think. Some more light-hearted horror might have romance with zombies and vampires. I feel like those two are the ones that are always chosen. Sometimes werewolves, but apparently creature features are the ones that always tend to add a little bit of romance into the horror. However, we have very many dark stories, thrillers, and horrors that talk about really disturbing or toxic relationships. Some other romantic horror movies talk about survival, about protection, and they blend very uniquely romance and gore and blood. There are many good stories that combined the both, and I think it can be done right without the romance having to be too cheesy and without having to lose or sacrifice too much of the horror and the scares. I'm not talking about, those horror movies that just throw a romantic relationship in there just for the mix, just to have it as a little subplot there, but it's not really important. I'm talking about those stories that manage to merge these two things really well. Sometimes romance is not even the main thing in the story, which, sometimes you have a slasher with a couple, you have a zombie outbreak, and we have a couple trying to survive together, but others have a lot more focus on the romance aspect. Sometimes the ones that include toxic relationships are the ones that are the darkest ones, because also those are something that we can relate to real life. Not that we can really relate to vampires, even though I kind of wish they would be here with us. Anybody in the room? But for now, the more realistic ones, until we can prove that vampires exist and they roam among us, are the ones where the toxic relationships are the ones that we are trying to survive. Both genres are kind of facing the unknown, falling in love with someone for the first time and entering a haunted house. You are entering the unknown. You don't know what to expect. You might have an idea based on other people's experiences and what people have been telling you, but you don't know exactly what you're gonna get. So today I'm offering you some book recommendations and some movie recommendations of stories that I think have blended very well love and horror. First, let's talk about a book that I'm pretty sure a lot of people know about, but I don't know if everybody has read at this point, and I strongly recommend to give it a chance. That is Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. And here you have a toxic relationship between two vampires. This is a story of Louis, and it is told from his own mind. You are listening to his words, and he's telling you his experiences as a mortal and also as an immortal. He tells his story and how he became a vampire and how he got turned by somebody called Lestat. Lestat chose Louis, turned him, and then he showed him how to live this immortal life. We follow Louis as he's struggling now that he is an immortal, and he is roaming the streets of New Orleans when he makes a very, not very smart decision, and he decides to turn a little girl called Claudia. So now they're a family of three, and Louis and Lestat have a very toxic relationship. This is pure Gothic vampire horror, but I like that the story really has a lot of emphasis on the feelings of the characters, their emotions, and the whole turmoil that they have to go through. I like the descriptions, the imaginary, the time period in New Orleans, the old Europe. These are real vampires. I feel like real people that have been put in this position, especially Louis, and are now struggling to do what they have to do to survive. I think this book presents many problems that are so realistic for a lot of people, and even though they are vampires, so they are immortal creatures, the problems that they have, the struggles that they're going through, they feel very human. Louis is basically tortured by guilt and loneliness. It talks about how people are tormented by the way that they look and how people cannot take them seriously because of the way that they look. And that is something that, for example, Claudia, as a little girl that has been turned to a vampire, goes through. What is loneliness when you are eternal? You know, what does it mean to be eternal, to be immortal? Is there a God out there? What does it mean to be good if you have to do the things you have to do to survive? It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. I love all the vampire books from Anne Rice, and I read this one when I was a teenager. I really enjoyed it, and I really think you guys should give it a chance if you've never read it. There is also a movie, obviously, so if you're interested, you can watch that as well. Then we have Dark House by Karina Hall, and this is part of a series. The series is called Experiment in Terror, and this is book 1, and it is a horror paranormal story. We follow Perry. She is your regular 20-something that is struggling and having a crisis post-college, but apart from that, you know, which are things that everybody struggles with and goes through in life, she also can see ghosts. But her life is about to take a new meaning because she meets a producer that wants to make a webcast about ghost hunting, and she feels like this is her calling now because this is something that she actually can do. And during that, she meets ghosts that sometimes can be very dangerous. Now, Perry as a character can be a little bit annoying, but when you are a 20-something struggling with what you want to become and you're just having an existential crisis, it's normal, I guess, that you would behave and say things that she says in the book. And she's also very smitten with this producer, Dex, and, you know, a lot of people might, you know, ship them. A lot of people might not like that relationship, but this is a series that I know some people really enjoyed when it comes to horror combined with romance. The pacing of the book can be slow at times. I feel like this is not one of those books that the most important thing is the plot. I think this is one of those books where the focus is truly in the characters. It's also not a very long book, so you can finish it quickly and see if you want to continue with the series. And this is, I think, has a lot more focus on the romance than Interview with a Vampire. Next we have a zombie story, and this one is called Thicker Than Blood, and it is co-written by Madeleine Sheehan and Claire C. Riley. We followed two best friends, two women that had the perfect life. You know, their husbands were friends, they had good jobs, and they were living a good life with a nice house, but then the zombie outbreak happened, and now they have lost absolutely everything, and these two women are left alone fighting the undead. They have to travel through a broken country, everything has been destroyed, the zombies are spreading around, and the only thing they have left to fight for is their friendship and trying to survive. But in this type of world, you know, after an apocalypse like this, the world is very much cutthroat, and so they are going to have sometimes to take decisions, take risks that might lead them into danger. And in a world where every little decision can lead to your death, is there room for love? It's a story about protecting your love to the death, about surviving, doing things you would never imagine you would do just to get by. And some of the bits of the story are really hard to read through because they're very intense. There are many like gut-wrenching scenes in the story, so be prepared for that. Moving on with our books, we have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, and this is a horror contemporary queer fiction book, and I really enjoyed this one a lot more than I had anticipated. And even though the romance here is not something that is like really predominant, the story does focus on the relationship between these two women and the changes that are going on in their relationship. Miri thinks that she has lost her wife, Leah. Leah goes to a deep sea mission and never comes back out. So at some point they assume that she is dead. And Miri is absolutely gutted and devastated. But then one day, Leah comes back. Miri is so happy to have her wife back, but she soon realizes that the Leah that comes back doesn't seem to be the same person. Even though Miri can see Leah physically, she's there, she doesn't seem to be the same. She seems to be changed, like something happened to her underwater. The way things were described in this book was absolutely delicious, like I could almost smell and taste the things that the author was describing. The atmosphere is fantastic, and we go back and forth from the present to the past, where Leah is underwater, to actually discover what happened to her, how she survived, and why she appears to have changed, what happened underwater. I think this story did such a good job at creating suspense and to be a thrilling story. Now, the horror is a little bit more light, but I think this was a beautiful story about grief, about relationships, and all of that, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's a sapphic story about grief and love and what we would do if our loved one changes. Would we still love them? And last but not least, I wanted to mention a true classic, because I don't know if many people talk about this classic a lot, but I remember specifically one of the movies adaptations that was done from this book that was something that I was obsessed with at the time, and that is The Phantom of the Opera. This is by Gaston Leroux, and this is a horror classic, obviously, but it is also a beautiful and tragic love story. This was first published as a serial, actually, in 1909 in France, and after that it was compiled together, it was translated, and I think it's a great classic that people are missing out on. It is the story of Christine. She loses her father and she is being raised up at an opera. She loves to sing, she's very talented, and she starts singing when she hears a voice in the background. That voice in the background is teaching her almost to sing, it's helping her, it's getting closer to her. All is going well until Christine's childhood friend Raoul decides to come around, and he is smitten with her, and he basically wants to, you know, be her boyfriend. But of course, our Phantom of the Opera, Eric, is not happy about it. He gets very, very jealous. So we have a love triangle. We have Christine, she's the desired one. We have her childhood friend Raoul. They are both regular human beings that look like regular, beautiful human beings. And then you have Eric, who is kind of like more of a pariah. He has been a little bit rejected from society because of the way he looks. The book is about Eric, a man that has lived with cruelty, that has known only cruelty his whole life, so he decided to hide from people. And then when he meets Christine, I guess, you know, he feels seen again, he experiences love, but to the point where love becomes obsession and it becomes a little bit toxic. This is such a true Gothic story from beginning to end, and even if you've seen already maybe the play, I think the novel, it still adds a lot more to the story. Now let's go to the movies, shall we? And the first one is actually a Korean movie that I think a lot of people should watch, especially if you like stories that are very different, because this is a vampire story, but not like your typical, you know, cape flying vampire type, and I'm talking about Thirst. We follow a respected and devoted Roman Catholic priest who becomes a vampire. Thirst is an engaging romantic horror movie as well as a solid yet unconventional vampire movie too. When our vampire meets a girl and falls in love with her, he is struggling because obviously he knows of his condition, he knows of his thirst, and he doesn't know if he can be with her without, you know, feeling the need to bite her a little bit too much. You can see in their relationship how their morals and their view in life is completely different, his and hers, and I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of this film. It's basically the study of a relationship between two individuals that couldn't be more different from each other. So I think this movie is fantastic. It has gained a cult following, so if you've never seen it before, please give it a chance. The next one I'm going to talk about is another one of my favorites, and that is because it is by Guillermo del Toro, and I'm talking about Crimson Peak. I think the aesthetic of this movie is wonderful, and it does have a novelization, so if you don't like watching movies, you can try the novelization of the movie. This movie is the perfect Gothic romance film. I think Guillermo has achieved perfection when it comes to Gothic romance with this movie. I know I'm a little bit biased because I really like him as a director, but watch the movie first and then tell me if you don't feel the same. It kind of will break my heart, but tell me anyway. We follow Edith, a woman who meets and falls in love with Thomas Sharp. However, when he takes her to his castle home where he lives with his sister Lucille, Edith realizes there's something in the house that isn't right and sets out to find what's haunting her before it is too late. I really enjoyed this movie. I think it has a lot of tropes from the time period as well, because Edith is a woman that was trying to become a writer, but because she's a woman, she's not given the chance to write about certain things. They just want her to write about romance. And then she meets this guy and she's totally smitten by him and decides to leave, you know, her job, her career, to go live with him. But when she gets to his house, things are not exactly how she imagined. Now, this movie might not have been received as well as his other movies because it was very different from the movies that he was doing back in the day, but it has been critically acclaimed and it has a high rating in Rotten Tomatoes. And trust me when I say this movie might have been a little bit underrated just because it was very different from his other movies that he had done so far. The production design, the colors, like the Gothic atmosphere, it's just fantastic. So give it a chance if you haven't yet. The next movie was kind of a surprise for me. I went to the cinema to watch this movie expecting, I don't know, to enjoy it, but I actually ended up loving it so much. This is such an unconventional love story, and I'm talking about Bones and All. A young cannibal named Maren is abandoned by her father, and so she decides to go to Minnesota to find her estranged mother. Along the way, she meets Lee and they start a very unconventional relationship. The thing is, this story could be simplified and just say these are two young people, a boy and a girl, that meet in weird circumstances, but they embark on a road trip together, start to get to know each other, and realize that they're falling in love. But of course, you have the other aspect of it, knowing that Maren is a cannibal, because you know that from the very beginning of the movie, so it's not a spoiler, and that adds such an interesting twist to the story and the way that their journey is gonna go. There's a lot of family drama, there's a lot of gore to go around, there are plot twists. I think the main actors did a great job in this movie, and it is so beautiful, but also a little bit devastating and sad because Maren specifically, she's a cannibal that wishes she wouldn't be. She doesn't like to hurt people, but in the end, if she doesn't eat, then she also dies. So if you've never seen this movie before, I recommend you to watch it. The next two movies that I wanted to mention are actually fairly new releases. They came out last year in 2024, so I'm mentioning these ones in hopes that you guys have not seen them yet. And the first one that I would like to talk about is a movie that a lot of people loved and a lot of people didn't enjoy so much, but I think it's going to become a cult classic in some time, and that is Lisa Frankenstein. It is a retelling of the classic Frankenstein story, but brought into modern times and focusing on a young goth woman named Lisa, who falls in love with a reanimated Victorian era corpse. So Lisa loses her mom and she is grieving, and her dad already brings a new girlfriend home. She hates everything. After being assaulted at a party, Lisa goes to a graveyard. She's having the worst time of her life when she witnesses a corpse from the Victorian era come back to life. So obviously, what do? You take it home. And this is a very cute, funny, it's kind of like almost cheesy movie about Lisa hiding the corpse of this guy, falling in love with him, spending time with him, and you see how, you know, the dead guy also changes throughout the movie, and you see the relationship flourish, and it is kind of silly because he's dead. So I know it's not gonna be for everybody, but I thought it was a very cute story. It has great designs, I like the look, it's very washed colors, and it's very much old school, and I think that's why it didn't appeal to a lot of the, you know, audience that we have nowadays going to the cinema to watch this type of films. But I think it's going to be a movie that a lot of people are going to revisit in some years. And last but not least, a movie that I watched right before 2024 was coming to an end. I think I watched this in November, and I thought to myself, this movie is amazing, and that is Your Monster. I also think this movie went under the radar for a lot of people, so I wanted to mention it here. I think I did mention it as well on my favorite movies of 2024 video as an honorable mention, but I wanted to talk about it here now. A soft-spoken actress finds her voice again when she meets a terrifying but weirdly charming monster that lives in her closet. Women falling for monsters is not a new concept. We have Buffy swooning over vampires, we have Belle getting feelings for beasts, and of course we have The Shape of Water, where a woman falls in love with basically a fish. And normally those relationships, they don't always end up well, not all of them, and Melissa Barrera's character here in this movie is hilarious. She basically goes from being really depressed after losing her job because she has an accident. She goes to her childhood home. She finds in the closet this beast, and their relationship from the very beginning is not a good relationship. They actually hate each other's guts, but the more that they are forced to live together, the more that they feel attracted for each other. And this movie had this type of dry, dark humor that I really enjoy, and it was a lot gorier and bloodier than I had imagined. It is such a fun movie, and it is a great way of almost doing a Beauty and the Beast retelling in a different horror setting, and not just, you know, taking the main story and just flipping it into horror. Like, it's taking the essence of Beauty and the Beast and making a horror movie with that in mind. And I thought it was fantastic. The screenplay is fantastic. Really enjoyed it. I think it's very underrated. Not many people have been talking about it, and it didn't even come to the cinema here in the Netherlands, which is a pity, so I couldn't watch it on the big screen. But if you have access to this movie, watch it. And those were, you guys, my 5 horror book and 5 horror movie recommendations that include love, that include romance, and that I feel in these stories both things are merged quite well together. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any other horror romance books that are really good, leave the recommendations down below. Same goes for the movies, leave the recommendations down below. And I hope that you have a great month of February. If you do celebrate Valentine's Day, I hope that you have an amazing day, and I hope to see you all here, as always, in our next coffee time. Bye!